Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the China Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the updates coming out of China and the rest of the region. President Donald Trump says he may be developing a denuclearization plan with China and Russia without providing any details. Speaking in Miami, he called the US the #1 nuclear power, adding that Beijing could catch up within 5 years. Trump also asked Chinese leader Xi Jinping to release jailed Hong Kong media mogul Jimmy Lai during their meeting in South Korea last week. Sources say Trump raised concerns about the 77-year-old's health and lengthy detention. China's trade negotiator Li Chenggang has called on Washington to create a favorable atmosphere for agricultural cooperation, blaming US tariffs for disrupting trade. The appeal follows Xi and Trump's meeting where Beijing pledged more US imports. The US State Department says Taiwan must be allowed full and equal participation at next year's APEC Summit in China. Washington's statement follows Taipei's complaint that Beijing imposed conditions on its attendance amid rising cross-strait tensions. Now at least 140 people are dead and 127 missing after Typhoon Kalmegi triggered catastrophic flooding across central Philippines. Officials say the storm is now moving towards Vietnam as rescue teams struggle to reach cut-off areas. Pyongyang has condemned the Trump administration's new sanctions over cybercrimes funding its nuclear program, calling US actions wicked hostility. Washington says North Korean hackers have stolen over $3 billion in digital assets to finance weapons development. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has led a state funeral for former ceremonial head of state Kim Yong-nam, who died at the age of 97. State media showed mourners lining Pyongyang streets as his flag-draped coffin was laid to rest at the Patriotic Martyrs ceremony. Japan has sent troops to Akita Prefecture after a surge in bear attacks left at least 12 dead and over 100 injured since April. Brown and Asiatic black bears are currently roaming into towns as they forage for food ahead of their hibernation season. Now those are the headlines of the hour and our top story. US President Donald Trump says he may be working on a joint denuclearization plan with China and Russia, though he provided no specific details. Speaking at the American Business Forum in Miami, Trump highlighted US nuclear strength, calling America the #1 nuclear power, followed by Russia and China. He added that Beijing could catch up within 4 or 5 years. Let's take a listen in to the US president's statements.
We make the best equipment, the best missiles, the best rockets, the best everything. We redid our nuclear. We're the #1 nuclear power, which I hate to admit because it's so horrible. It's such a horrible situation if it ever has to be used. Russia's second. China's a distant third, but they'll catch us within 4 or 5 years. They want to catch us, and they'll be able to catch us. And we're maybe working on a plan to denuclearize the 3 of us, so we'll see if that works. But we have the strongest military anywhere in the world by far. We're investing $1 trillion in the United States Armed Forces this year. It's the biggest amount we've ever invested.
Now, Trump's comments come as Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a detailed review of proposals for potential nuclear test preparations in Russia. Putin reiterated that Russia remains committed to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, but warned that Moscow would respond in kind if Washington or any other nuclear power resumes tests. Now joining us to discuss this is Andrew K. Leung. He's a China strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you for joining us. following Trump's statements, how realistic is it, is the idea of denuclearization between these powers, Moscow, Beijing, and Washington?
Well, first of all, the nuclear warheads of the United States and Russia and China, they have now become more advanced, much more advanced, and much more powerful than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end the Second World War, multiple times more powerful. And then, of course, each country has enough warheads to destroy the world several times over. The United States has about less than 4,000 warheads. Russia has slightly more than 4,000. And China is less than even 1,000. But it's not just the number. As I said, these warheads are so powerful that they destroy the world several times over. However, it's not just the warheads, it's the delivery system. Now, both Russia and China have got hypersonic delivery systems.
Yes.
And intercontinental missiles.
Andrew,
so that's in the delivery system that President Trump is trying to catch up with. But of course, his suggestion to denuclearize is a good one, because there's no point for other countries to stockpile their nuclear armament. And that could lead to a very dangerous world.
Andrew, given the geopolitical tensions right now between, of course, these three nuclear superpowers, how likely is it that the three reach an agreement to denuclearize?
I think that, don't forget the denuclearization pact with Iran was jettisoned by Trump twice. But of course, that Iran is expected of delivering its nuclear weapons. And as I said, China doesn't want, nor Russia, want a world where different countries are developing their nuclear weapons, and that will lead to a very dangerous world. So I think that there is room for the three countries to agree on some sort of protocol. But I think that also Trump is wanting to enhance the United States delivering systems. It's put on notice by Russia's recent display of its underwater nuclear power drones that Putin says can't be stopped. So I think that there is a bit of rivalry there as well.
Yes, Andrew, thank you. Do stay with us. We have further news coming out of China, where Beijing's top trade negotiator, Li Chenggang, has urged the United States to help create what he called a favorable atmosphere for agricultural cooperation between the two nations. Speaking in Beijing to a visiting US agricultural trade delegation, Li said recent fluctuations in agricultural trade stemmed from unilateral tariffs imposed by Washington. The two sides discussed broader economic and trade relations, with both expressing hope for stable cooperation. The talks, of course, come after last week's Xi-Trump meeting in South Korea, where Beijing pledged to resume bulk purchases of US soybeans. That is at least 12 million tons over the next 2 months, and a minimum of 25 million tons annually for the next 3 years. At the International Import Expo in Shanghai, Premier Li Qiang reaffirmed China's commitment to opening its market. The US agricultural industry is showcasing products from 19 producers, underscoring efforts to revive trade ties. Andrew, when it comes down to agricultural products specifically, does this signal Beijing's attempt to stabilize relations after months of this tariff uncertainty?
Months of tariff war is hurting both countries, frankly. On the United States, it depends on China as the world's biggest customer for agricultural products. And China has always been the largest customer of American soybeans. And the soybeans states in the American Midwest is the Republican Party's main political supporter So I think that this opens up a platform where both countries can start to cooperate. China, after the trade war, is now repivoting its purchases from Brazil and restoring to its former position as the biggest customer of American soybeans. So I think that also through that position, Beijing wants to hope to moderate at least some of the anti-China policies of the second Trump administration.
Yes, okay. Andrew KP Leung, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the program, as always. Now, as China is set to host the 2026 APEC Summit, debate has sparked over the participation of Taiwan. The US State Department has issued a statement saying that Taiwan must be allowed equal participation in the summit. Earlier, Taipei had complained that Beijing had imposed several conditions on its attendance. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is one of the few international bodies where both China and Taiwan are members. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry has responded and stated that Taiwan's participation in APEC activities must comply with the One China principle. A US State Department official said that Taiwan's participation should be on an equal footing, consistent with the guidelines and rules established by the grouping. In the past, Beijing hosted the APEC summits in 2001 and 2014. The 2014 summit was attended by Taiwan when relations were better between China and the self-governed island. However, there was no participation from Taiwan in 2001. It is significant to see how the situation evolves as tensions continue to rise in the Taiwan Strait. Now joining us to discuss this is Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst and he joins us from the Taiwanese capital of Taipei. Ross, it's always a pleasure to talk to you here on the program. Ross, of course, Washington says Taiwan must have equal participation in the upcoming APEC summit next year. How does this statement change the tone of cross-strait diplomacy, if at all?
I think the second part of your question is the key issue here. The if at all part, does it really have any substantive impact on where things stand? The government in China is not talking to the government in Taiwan. That's been the situation since 2016 because each side has very different conceptions of what the relationship between China and Taiwan should be. That's not going to change. So the key issue for the APEC meeting, which is still a year away, is who does Taiwan propose to send as its representative? Because part of the agreement that allowed Taiwan to be a member of APEC and to be an equal member of APEC along with the other members is that Taiwan's leader, the president, does not attend. So so we talk about Taiwan being an equal member of APEC, but the starting point is actually unequal because its leader, by agreement, does not attend. They send some representative. Now, the issue is, and put aside all this talk over the past few hours, the Taiwan government saying that concerns about the security of the delegation. Frankly, I think it's really unlikely China would kidnap the delegation from Taiwan. But really, the key issue is going to be who does Taiwan propose to send as its representative, and will China be agreeable, or will they object and say that person is too political? Can you find somebody who's less political? And the Taiwan government might say, no, it's up to us who we get to select to be our representative at APEC. So there is this threshold issue of who will represent Taiwan, and that's before you get into any other issues.
Yes, and Ross, of course, we saw no participation from Taiwan in 2001. We did in 2014. However, Beijing said that Taiwan's participation must comply with the One China principle if Taiwan was to attend. What does that entail?
Yeah, that's really interesting because we don't know what exactly China wants in that regard. I mean, obviously, the Taiwan representative can't come to APEC and say, I'm there to campaign for the recognition of Taiwan independence. That's a non-starter. But is China asking the Taiwan government to make some kind of statement about supporting a one China principle? Chances are no, and the Taiwan government wouldn't do that anyway. But I think what China is saying is in the weeks or months preceding APEC, if you're going to be talking about Taiwan independence or separate identity and things like that, then it's going to make it very difficult for China to be agreeable to whoever Taiwan proposes to be the representative. So I think generally China's position is unchanged insofar as that they have their red lines with regard to actions or statements by the Taiwan government as to Taiwan's status, but ultimately it comes down to what Taiwan government does say or do in the period preceding the APEC meeting, including who Taiwan proposes to send as its representative.
Yes, Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we have further news coming out of the region, of course. And there are reports that during last week's meeting in South Korea between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Trump raised the issue of Jimmy Lai with the Chinese leader. However, the same reports say that no specific deal was discussed for the release of the 77-year-old media tycoon who faces trial on national security charges. It is also being reported that President Trump suggested to President Xi that Lai's release would be good for US-China relations and for China's image as well. However, there has been no official confirmation from the White House regarding the issue being raised by President Trump during the meeting. Jimmy Lai has been facing national security charges in China for conspiracy to collude with foreign powers. He was arrested in December of 2020 and has been in detention ever since. It is significant as President Trump, before departing for his Asia trip, has stated that he would raise the issue of Jimmy Lai with President Xi. And so we have Ross Feingold once again with us. Ross, why would this be an issue that Donald Trump would raise in this crucial talks between President Xi and, of course, President Trump?
We have to keep in mind that the protests in Hong Kong occurred in 2019 during the first Trump administration, and the U.S. government, along with other governments such as the U.K., responded in the months and period after that, such as putting sanctions on Chinese and Hong Kong government officials, putting in place laws and regulations to welcome people from Hong Kong to relocate. So there is this history of the Trump administration following closely developments in Hong Kong. And subsequently, Lai's family and supporters have continued to advocate for him in Washington, in London, and other capitals around the world. So it's an issue that foreign governments are aware of. And Lai has excellent relationships, or his family, with the Trump administration. And it's something that they have invested in over the past few years. So they've certainly had outreach to the White House, and that's why the White House is aware of this issue. There are reports that White House personnel have told people in the period after the meeting that Trump did in fact raise this issue, even though Trump hasn't personally spoken about this. But even if it wasn't raised in the bilateral meeting between Xi Jinping and President Trump, certainly the Trump administration is raising this with the Chinese government whenever they do interact. However, I think the answer from the Chinese government is going to be to say that Hong Kong still has an independent judicial system and we can't interfere. Now, that doesn't mean that Jimmy Lai won't be freed in the future, but chances are that the Chinese government's view is that the judicial process still has to play itself out.
Yes, and Ross, what more can you tell us about Jimmy Lai's arrest, just briefly, and what he's accused of? Of course, he's been detained since 2020 for conspiracy to collude with foreign powers. Is there credibility behind this?
Well, the fact is, during that period of protest in 2019, Jimmy Lai and people working with him did interact with foreign governments and think tanks, foreign media, to talk about the situation in Hong Kong. And they did discuss things such as sanctions on Hong Kong and Chinese government officials. And now the law in Hong Kong says what you did was illegal. Now, in other countries, we would say that's a very normal thing for a civil society or opposition politicians to do, is to interact with governments around the world and say, this is what's going on in our country, or in the case of Hong Kong, in the special administrative region of Hong Kong. So, in a Western democratic perspective, this is perfectly normal, but this activity is actually a crime in Hong Kong now.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak to you here on NewsX World. We now move on and over to Japan for our next story, where Prime Minister Tsunai Takaichi held her first phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, pledging continued support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. Takaichi reaffirmed Japan's commitment to helping Ukraine's recovery, reconstruction and pursuit of a just peace, while Zelensky thanked Japan for its ongoing aid. Both leaders agreed to strengthen cooperation on security and development. Zelensky expressed gratitude for Japan's assistance in energy infrastructure to help Ukrainians through the winter. Later, Takaichi also spoke with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, agreeing to deepen bilateral and multilateral cooperation to promote a free and stable international order. Moving on now, and Typhoon Kalaigme has killed at least 140 people and left 127 missing after unleashing devastating flooding across the central Philippines as the storm has headed towards Vietnam. Floodwaters are described as unprecedented, rushed through the Cebu province's towns and cities, sweeping away cars, riverside shanties, and even massive shipping containers. The National Civil Defense has reported 114 deaths, as this count did not include an additional 28 reported by Cebu provincial authorities. Meanwhile, in Lilion, a town near Cebu City, where 35 bodies have been recovered from flooded areas. And that's a wrap on the China Report today. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.